Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Schmidt with Wright Library. I want to welcome you to Anti-Racism 101, the webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about anti-racist action for white people. And this is part of an educational series presented by Dr. Michaela Null of Surge, Ohio. That's showing up for racial justice. And you will find the rest of the webinars on our library page. It's wrightlibrary.org/ Anti-Racism 101. I'll put that in the chat for you. And I want to acknowledge that this issue can be contentious and stress that Wright Library is a nonpartisan organization. Our website also links to critical perspectives on anti-racism. And a lot of the articles that we share there are written by Black and Brown people. So I encourage you to check that out. I'll put that link in the chat. And, but no matter what your politics are, this is just hugely informative and a great opportunity for everybody to learn. We're really thankful that Dr. Null is here to work with us. And before I pass it over to her, I want to put in a plug for the Oakwood Inclusion Coalition. This is our last anti-racism program for a little while, but we'll refer you to the Oakwood Inclusion Coalition, where they're starting to do some book clubs and things like that. I'll put that in the chat too. And now I'd like to present Dr. Michaela Null. She has a PhD in sociology and women's studies from Purdue University and has taught classes at many institutions, including Wright State, Wittenberg, and Sinclair. And as I mentioned, she is a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice. Please help me welcome Dr. Michaela Null.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, great. All right, so as Elizabeth mentioned, this is anti-racist actions for white people. This is part 4 in the Anti-Racism 101 series. Each different component was meant to be, you don't have to have watched the other ones to get anything out of this particular one, but they do build upon each other. So if you're interested in going back and looking at some of the other ones, that would be useful to you if you're interested in this sort of thing. So the first thing I want to address is why for white people. So that's a very particular thing in the title of this presentation, Anti-Racist Actions for White People. Part of the interesting thing about this series is that it focused on whiteness and white supremacy and focused on educating white people about how to be anti-racist. White people have, on the whole, very different experiences in some ways from many other people of different races. And that gives white people some very particular blind spots sometimes. Not that we don't all share certain blind spots, but sometimes our privilege shelters us from having thought through or worked through some of the things that might be really useful in combating racism. It's also a thing where, for white people especially, we're often afraid to do the wrong thing, to be called racist, to whatever. And so there are some specific things that I think white people have to learn and practice in order to engage in anti-racism. Not that this presentation can't be useful for everyone. I think that it can, but particularly this presentation is centered on anti-racist actions for white people. So I want to review our working understanding of racism. So racism is systemic. It's greater than a few individual instances or a couple people being biased, or you know, a couple instances in our history that are racist or what have you. Racism and white supremacy are ingrained and embedded in all the stuff that we do all the time, right? So even though we're trying to shed that, and we're hopefully actively working against racism and white supremacy, we still live in a culture that's saturated in it and that is built upon and comes from it. So while we'll be talking today about what you can do as an individual, part of what you can do is make sure that your focus is on the system and the systems that are in place that continue and perpetuate racism, our participation and complicity in it, but focusing on the system is really important, because focusing on individuals can distract us from the bigger picture. So Jay Smooth, who did for a while did some commentary on race, has a great video called How to Tell Someone They Sound Racist. And in it, he compares someone who's being racist to someone who steals your wallet. He's like, you know, I don't care if the person who stole my wallet thinks of himself as a thief. I care that he stole my wallet and then I get it back. So focusing on individuals sometimes distracts us from those outcomes and rectifying the outcomes. So the other thing is that we don't have to be white supremacists or racists in this active, severe extremist way that we often think of it as, in order to participate and be complicit in racism and white supremacy. So we need to be critical. We need to think about the ways that we may or may not reproduce those things by the ways that we interact with our culture and with other people. So the first thing is educate yourself. So if you're here, you're doing that, that's great. And I will say there's a caveat here with educate yourself, because one thing that sometimes people get caught up in is they just want to educate themselves and they don't go beyond that education. Education is a good first step, right? We want to be educated. We want to know things. We want to be aware of the issues that are out there, of the facts, of scientific studies, what have you. But we don't want to get so comfortable in just educating ourselves that we're then not taking that beyond that education. We want to implement that education. So that said, educate yourself. So what are some ways you might do that? Use your library. So if you are a member of Wright Memorial Library and you have a library card, you can get access to a ton of things, not just books, but a ton of other things that you can use to educate yourself. So I know this because I signed up for a library card, and specifically to look at what materials you might have available to you. If you don't have a Wright Memorial Library card and you live in Ohio, you can actually go online and get a online only library card, which gives you access to all their electronic resources, which is really nice. So I did, and I will include this eventually. Oh, you can't see that. I did create a list of documentaries. Here we go. And there's probably gonna eventually be more than this, but I will put that at the end of the PowerPoint slides that get posted online. So Canopy is one resource that you have for learning. There's films on there, but there's also lots of really good documentaries. So one of my favorite documentaries for learning about race and racism is called Race, the Power of an Illusion. It's this first one here. That's available online, streaming through Canopy. It is a 3-part series that goes over different aspects of the history of racism and kind of untangles this idea that we have about race and race as biology. So Canopy is one place you can go. You can also go there and just search racism and come up with a lot of different things. Hoopla is also a digital resource that Wright Library has that have, you can get access to books, but also documentaries and films as well. And so this is just an initial list of ones that you can get on there. You also get access to the great courses, and there's potentially some stuff that you could find on there. The great courses is a resource of literal like online courses on different topics. And oh, that's right, there's also, in fact, several, I think 2 or 3 different resources on Lynda, LinkedIn Learning, which is another online learning resource that you can get through the library. So lots of libraries are investing in this stuff, and I think it's really great. So use your library. Research anti-racist efforts in your community, in your communities. So, you know, that could mean the place you live. That could mean in your church and religious practice. That could mean lots of different things. But do some research, find out what's going on in your area. Like, what are the issues? What could you pay more attention to? What's affecting people of color in the area where you live? So that's really helpful. And to that end, you can attend educational events, panels, or other activities. There are lots of different people to look to for these, and they don't need to be in person because like we're doing now, there's lots of stuff that is taking place on Zoom. So one place to look, often universities, local universities, they will have guest speakers, they will have presentations, they will have their own professors doing presentations. So you can look to that, look to different educational events that may be happening and available through universities. You can look at organizations. So for example, the YWCA in Dayton does a lot of education about racism. So that's one place that you could look. And in fact, I know that they are doing a panel or discussion of medical racism on Thursday night, so 2 days from now. And I can put that information in my slides at the end as well. Online, and in addition, communities could mean things like if you're part of the gaming community, or if you're part of, you know, other different communities. There are folks who do all sorts of anti-racist work in different areas of life. You can even audit a university course on race or racial inequality. And in fact, for some people, that would be a free course. So for example, at Sinclair, I believe if you're 65 or up, you can take an audit a course for free. And that's just one thing that you could do. There are lots of places like that that give you opportunities for lifelong learning. So to that end, I would look for at places around here, I would say sociology, sometimes psychology, and there might be specialized courses in other areas, but I don't know as much about those. Form or join a critical reading or discussion group. So if it is hard for you to slog through a book by yourself, you can join a discussion group. You can attend and discuss with other people, and always seek out more information, especially if you are a group of white people who are discussing things together. You want to make sure to be critically minded and not just staying within your bubble of your own experience. Some things not to do. Do not expect people of color to educate you. If it's their job to educate people, and particularly if it's they're including white people in that education, you can request their services and pay for their work. But people you know, friends, coworkers, other folks, make sure that you're doing the work yourself before you reach out and expect other people to engage with you in a meaningful way. So that is something that sometimes happens, is white people kind of feel lost, like, oh, I don't know what to look for, and they just kind of feel overwhelmed. And if you just take a breath and Google some stuff, sometimes you can find what you're looking for. But you can always, especially if you work for a company or an agency, they can pay people to come educate people, to do different kinds of anti-racist trainings and activities and things like that. This is my caveat. Do not go to YouTube for anti-racist education unless you're going to a specific and trusted source. So an organization that specifically focuses on anti-racism, or someone who is well known for speaking about it, or someone who is an academic experienced, or some sort of more trusted central source. And the reason that I say that is because, while this may not have been the case many years ago, at this point, if you go to YouTube and you're looking for different topics about anti-racism, or different topics that that sort of make up our system of racism, often what you're gonna do is you're gonna end up finding extremist and racist things and white supremacist things that are out there. That's because of the way that YouTube works. So the algorithm for YouTube actually works to suggest more things to you, and more not necessarily extreme veins, but it sometimes can push people's suggested topics to an extreme. And that is because YouTube is based on short videos that get lots of clicks. Those tend to be less well researched. And so the algorithm tends to suggest things for you that go farther and farther in a particular direction. So for example, if you go to YouTube and look up implicit bias, which is something that often will examine when doing anti-racist work, you're going to find a lot of things that misconstrue what that work looks like. And it's not necessarily going to help you learn. So beware of those two things. Here are just some topics to get you started. I'm not going to go through each of these, but Indigenous poverty, mass incarceration, being an active bystander, which we'll talk a little bit more about, how race intersects with other aspects of identity. So like race and disability, for example, things like that, race and class, how those things intersect and comprise our different experiences. Housing inequality, health inequality, lots of things like that. Cultural appropriation is a good thing to learn about and understand. Microaggressions is another one. So If you have any questions about any of those, we could definitely talk about that. So educate yourself, believe people of color. All right, so what this means is we need to fight against a lot of the ways that we are taught to mistrust people of color as white people. So often people of color are not believed about their own experiences. This is not just an individual bias, but a historical structural bias. So this idea that people of color were less intelligent than white people, or that they were misconstruing things or exaggerating, and this is a thing that's actually really, really serious. So when it comes to healthcare, one of the big problems with race and healthcare is that healthcare professionals, on average, rate and assess people of color, and Black people in particular, their pain at a lower level than they report. So what happens is they're skeptical that these people are expressing their experiences in a truthful way, or there is a long-standing myth that's embedded in our society that Black people can withstand more pain. And this leads to all sorts of things. I was just watching a documentary with some other folks about infant mortality and parent childbirth mortality. And one of the things that happens is that women who are people who are experiencing childbirth run into complications and aren't believed by their providers, or their the issues they bring up are sort of like shrugged off. This is what happened with Serena Williams, if you heard about that story, where she was having some major complications after birth and almost died had her husband not insisted that they look into what she was experiencing. So this is something that is, again, bigger than us as individuals, but something that we as individuals can work against. So believe what people of color are saying about their experiences. Don't wait until a white person validates what they have said in order for it to carry weight. It's easy for us to do sometimes because the cultural bias in our society is that, particularly when we're talking about racism, that white people are more objective. And because they're not the ones necessarily experiencing racism, that they don't have this investment, and therefore aren't biased. But that's not the case. In fact, there's a lot of things that white people don't understand about racism because they haven't experienced it. So if you catch yourself doing that, just be critical of that and reflect, and think about how you can catch yourself when you do that next time. Do not require people of color to be calm or respectable for you to believe them, to look a certain way, to carry themselves a certain way, to not be angry about having experienced racism. So I will give you an example. So say you are in your cubicle at work and you hear another coworker angrily ranting to another coworker that the supervisor doesn't respect Black employees and always gives them harsher criticism, right? That's a simple thing that might happen. You might overhear somebody else talking about feeling like they've experienced discrimination or racism. And there are some things that come up for us often when we hear other people upset about their experiences. And one thing that we often do is try to assess the validity of their experience by running it by our own experience, which is the natural thing to do. But we want to resist the urge to use our own experiences as a measuring stick, especially as white people, because we have very different experiences. We might not be as attentive to the racial bias that is happening. We might not be experiencing it, so we're not seeing it. It's harder to see if someone is not treating you poorly, because it's the absence of something. If there's a presence of discrimination or a presence of mistreatment, then you might be more able to articulate that, more able to see the patterns that are happening, right? So as a white person, you might not see the whole picture. So sometimes we'll try to use our experiences to say, well, I didn't see that, or I've never heard them talk that way. But when we do that, we have to stop and think about that. Okay, that can be true. And it's not that our experiences aren't valid, but also there may be some things that we have not experienced, and therefore we can't really have quite the handle on it. So sometimes instead of running our experiences by and saying, well, my experience is clearly the one that is the most truthful or the most relevant, try to focus on the experiences of whichever group or whichever kind of person is experiencing discrimination or racism. Also, resist the urge to discount people based on their disposition or your discomfort. This is something that is really interesting, because in white culture, which that is a thing, white people have their own cultural sensibilities. We tend to see that as culture, as the American culture. But it's a very specific kind of socialization, right? So as white people, we're often taught to not rock the boat, to be nice, to carry ourselves a certain way, to not raise your voice, to not be disruptive, and to not make other people uncomfortable. And so when we see people who may be upset, raising their voice, angry, often what white people will do is say, oh, they're so over the top, or, they're really emotional. And part of what that is white culture and white supremacy saying, like, someone else's experiences aren't valid because they're not behaving in a certain way. And the problem with that is racism is really enraging, right? So if you are someone who's experiencing racism or discrimination, and that's something that you have to think about constantly all the time, something that you've experienced over and over and over again, in particular, you should be upset that that's happening. It's a natural thing to be upset if you feel you're being discriminated against. But we want people to be calm and collected about it, and to suppress those feelings. And given our cultural programming, that's sort of the way that we have been taught to function. But we have to, again, learn not to use that measuring stick in cases where it's sane to be upset about some of these things. And it's certainly sane and reasonable to speak up about feeling that you've been a victim of racism. Third, resist telling people of color how to handle inequality or racism. You can, ask people how you can best support them. But things like, well, if they only did it this way, I bet it would be more effective. Or if the process was like this, or if they approached the boss like this. Those suggestions generally aren't helpful. And they're, again, coming from the experience you have as a white person. And then centering white culture and how to get by and do better within white culture, rather than breaking those patterns we have in society, if that makes sense. Look at my time. Okay, so educate yourself, believe people of color, take action. So taking action can mean lots of different things, but I'm going to give you some suggestions. Donate your money to people of color or organizations led by people of color. This can be to individuals you see who are raising money for, just to get back in housing, or people you see who've had family members who are victims of police brutality. It can be just donating money to an organization. In addition to that, you can support Black businesses, and not only through money, but through talking about them, getting people to, go to their page or their Instagram, and seeing what they have to offer. So sometimes this is a hard thing to get people to do. And sometimes people want to put parameters around what to do with the money. And, while that is perhaps an understandable urge, again, you as a white person can't donate to a person of color and say, but only if you do it the way I think you should do it. There shouldn't be a contingency on that. Now, of course, you can donate to whomever you like, based on how you feel about different organizations. But donating money and letting people have money it's really actually super powerful, because if you have a resource, it's different than having a resource that is static. So with donating money, there are lots of flexible ways that can be utilized for whatever the person or the organization needs at a particular time, and they can assess their needs as they see fit and use that money in different ways. So money is a really powerful thing to do. Donate money. Another thing you can do is intervene when you observe racism or racial inequalities. You have to think about when and how it's appropriate to do so. Obviously, the safety of the people involved is very important. The ways that you might intervene might be should be centered on what a person needs, which is why I keep going back to, okay, how can you support people of color? How do they need you to support them, rather than how you would like to do things? And we'll talk a little bit more later, maybe if we have time, about active bystander or bystander intervention. Show up for people of color. So that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean literally putting your white body in a space, so that the people who are, who are in charge or who are representing us see that it's not just Black people, but white people as well who have an eye on things. Use your white privilege to fight white supremacy. So use your white privilege for change. If we're talking about maybe post-COVID at a rally or a protest, literally putting yourself between a person of color and the police can be useful. So a lot of organizations will strategize to do that because there is less likely to be violence against a white person. Not that that never happens, but there's less likelihood. You know, and showing up for people of color could be like, you know, if something really serious has happened in the news about, you know, some racist incidents. So for example, not that this still doesn't happen, but particularly at the beginning of COVID last year, there were lots and lots of spikes in anti-Asian racism. And people I knew were experiencing racism and epithets on a daily basis based on those things. And so one thing you could do in that case is just check on them. What do they need? Do they need support? Do they just need to know that somebody's paying attention? Do they need, you know, a meal? Ask what they, you know, just check on them and ask what they need. Showing up for people of color could be like making sure that if you're in a room and you hear something racist, that you don't wait for a person of color to speak up about it. That you, you know, respond thoughtfully and challenge racism, and don't rely on people of color to have to constantly fight that, because it's exhausting. So hold your local, state, and national representatives accountable. So accountable, this is accountable if they say or do something racist or support racist policies. This is accountable if they purport that they are going to do something that is anti-racist or have some sort of anti-racist initiative. So for example, there is the Human Relations Council in Dayton, and currently there's a petition going around that, you know, the city of Dayton declared racism like an official social problem, and created this Human Relations Council, but then 2 years in a row has cut their funding. And I put here by the standards of those people affected in the group, because sometimes as a white person, you might see, you know, something happen, or you think that, you know, well, this person has been held accountable for that, or they say they're going to do this, but your standards and the standards of people who are affected may be different. And so you need to think about the potential difference in what those are. If we're going to center these actions on people of color, we also have to think about what the end result means to them, right? So what is a good result or a good outcome from their point of view? Educate and call in your friends and family members. This is a really difficult one for lots of us. And ooh, it's yeah, especially in the last several years, this has been something that's been very difficult. You can talk with other people about ways they've experienced this and ways that they've discussed racism with their family members. And this could be like a whole series in itself. But just think about you know, ways that you're able to push back against racism or racist assumptions when it comes to your family and friends. because if you can't call them out, who else can, right? You could do something like review the equity of your workplace's policies, or what are their policies around discrimination or equity? How does that work? Who decides? Who is, you know, do their policies fit what actually happens, right? So that's one thing that you could do. There's lots of different ways that you could look at the systems that we live in and how they might reproduce some inequality. All right, so let's see, it was educate yourself, believe people of color, take action, and close disparities in your personal sphere. So that's fancy word for expand your mind. So close disparities, and what I mean by that is that as white people, we often are exposed to people who are like us. That's what we are exposed to most of the time. We know that the media that we get, the information, the history, all those things that we get tend to be centered around white people. And so we get our own experiences sometimes mirrored back to us in terms of race. So take stock of the media, books, knowledge, and history you've been exposed to and that you seek out, that you tend to seek out, or that you make available to your children. So do the stories that you tend to be interested in center around a white character? Do the books at your children's school tend to center around white characters? Do you care more about a protagonist in a story if they're white? Are you more invested? Just be critical about some of those things that make up our culture and that influence us. Take stock of the knowledge and history that you've been exposed to, and not just like, okay, do I know anything about Latino history or Chicano history, but do I have I learned from people who are Latino or Chicano, right? The people who are producing the knowledge are also important, right? Because we tend to often get knowledge from people who have been privileged enough to move on and become experts, to get degrees and to get experience in certain areas. And we have to expand who we take to hold certain kinds of knowledge, if that makes sense. So make an effort to expose yourself to more media created by non-white folks, books written by non-whites, and knowledge and history produced by or about non-white people. Time check. All right. Practice. This one is important. So again, we can have this idea of what should happen or what we should do in our minds, but especially because some of these things are so difficult, they can make you feel very harried, they can make you feel very uncomfortable. Practicing dealing with some of these things is really useful, and we're not taught how to do this stuff. We're taught how to avoid confrontation, not how to successfully engage in challenging things. So practice being an active bystander. And what I mean by that is, like, do some homework that is, meeting up with some friends and going through different scenarios of, if you were to observe this happening, like, what are some ways that you might intervene? And that doesn't necessarily have to be in a confrontational way. It can be using humor. It can be using distraction. you know, just to get the person out of the situation. And so there's lots of different ways to do that. Practice seeking alternatives to police. So look into alternatives to calling the police. What are other resources in your particular area for handling challenges that maybe don't need to involve the police? So, you know, because we know that when police get involved, when it involves a person of color, that there is a chance that things might get out of control and escalate very quickly, and that they could be killed. We have, if you didn't know, recently in Dayton, I believe, I want to say it was on the 6th, but it might have been the 5th of February, in Trotwood, there was a police shooting. And if you haven't heard about that, think about why that might be, and maybe look it up, because there hasn't been a whole lot of news about it. There should be more, but there is some news out there to educate yourself. Practice refuting common racist or white supremacist tropes. And by that I mean things like, well, it's not race. I'm not racist because I have a Black friend and they weren't upset by it. Or why can't I say the N-word? So these are things that come up, you know, lots of times when discussing race. And they don't necessarily have to be nefarious, or sometimes people just think that they're being the devil's advocate. Think about what that means when you're saying that, the devil's advocate. But you know, think about ways that you might refute those things when they come up, whether that is knowing the facts about a particular thing, whether that's asking people important questions that get them to question the logic that they're using, whether that's getting people to understand the context, right? The context for the N-word is very specific. And there are specific reasons that white people, that it means something different, perhaps, when white people use it. So practice those things. Look up and think about ways that you might tell people they're racist. Practice responses to being called in, and or being called out, either one. But if someone says something that you're saying or doing is racist, or that the outcome of something is racist, or, you know, even like someone in your community, practice being thoughtful about that, because we tend to want to be really reactionary to that. And sometimes if we take a moment and think it through, and maybe even educate ourselves a little bit, we might see where you know, we were doing something we didn't realize was reinforcing racism or white supremacy. All right, practice. Lastly, remember, it's not about you. So you are not the center of the anti-racism world, right? So if you feel sad about racism, don't burden a person of color with that. You know, you can talk to your anti-racist white friends about that, but it's not about you. So bringing attention to yourself and your own feelings, even though we're processing things as white people, do not center the conversations about racism on you, unless you're in a space where you're talking about whiteness and critical experiences of whiteness, and then perhaps it can be about you. But on the whole, it's not about you. So don't make it about you. Center the experiences and needs of the affected group. And, you know, realize that people from different racial groups have very different experiences. There are obviously commonalities, but the experience is of that Asian American folks tend to have with our system of policing is very different than Latinos or Black folks. So we have to think about that affected group and what their experiences are like. Like I said, I'm not listing the resources here, but I will have a pretty extensive reading and resources list. The other thing that I want to mention that I will put in at the end as well is when I was doing some looking into resources for bystander intervention, because someone asked last time, well, where do you get trained in bystander intervention? And I couldn't find any really good trainings that are coming up through Surge or through pretty much anyone else. But I did find Ohio State has an institute for the study of race and ethnicity, and they have online implicit bias training. So learning about implicit bias, what it means, and how to work against it. They also have an online training on being a good bystander. So it is, I want to say, it's a long training. So you could watch it in chunks, and watch it with a friend and practice. But it's called "Did They Really Just Say That? Being an Active Bystander." So there will be a link to that in the resources as well. And now it's time for a question.
Great. Wow. Thanks, Michaela. Those are great resources. And I want to especially thank you for plugging the library. And I loved your list of films that we have available. And we can definitely put that up on our website too. So, and we can add the implicit bias training and the other great resources also. So we do have some questions, and I invite anybody to add to the Q&A or the chat. We did get some links to the shooting in Trotwood. So
Okay.
That was something that I hadn't heard about, but there are links there. And let me just go back here. So here's a question. When you educate yourself about anti-racism and discover that the dominant rule makers continue to develop a system of dominance, how do you push through this continued dynamic? So I guess just if things aren't changing, if you see systems continuing, how do you keep going?
That's hard. That's a really heavy question, because it is easy to get discouraged when it feels like nothing's changing, and because one thing that happens with racism sometimes is that things seem to change, but they just shift. So even though now we're experiencing an uptick in what I would call overt racism and racial hate, we tend to think of that as something that happened a long time ago. And then because people weren't as open about racism, somehow it didn't exist. But what had happened was it was transformed a little bit. So how racism was operating wasn't necessarily out in the open in this openly hateful way, but it was still embedded in these systems. And that is really frustrating. And what we can do is just try to find those little ways that we can make a difference. Try to find those little changes that we can make. And sometimes we're more powerful than we think. We have a lot more possibilities available to us than we think. And sometimes we just need resources and support for how to do that. There was a time in my life where I would have never thought to look at, for example, you know, the policies of the workplace that I'm in, right? And how that might affect people of color. So just try to see those little hopeful things, and try to help people think outside of the system that we have already. So a lot of what we do is challenge the system. But one thing that's good, like, what would a not racist society look like? And even if we don't think that like we could click our fingers and get there, it imagining a different world sometimes opens up possibilities for us.
Here's a good question. How do you answer challenge that problems with the Black community are due to Blacks making personal choices? Is it that it's their fault, that the racism is their fault, say?
Okay. Ooh, I can tell you a couple of ways that I handle that. As a sociologist, one way that I handle it is to get people to question, what is a personal choice, right? What do we mean by personal choice? And we don't want to say that people don't have agency or personal choice, because they do, right? But because of the society we live in, choices are often constrained, right? So your ability to challenge challenge a system, or your ability to make certain choices might be constrained. You, like, if we were living in an ideal society, maybe that would be an easy choice for someone. But I'm trying to think of like a concrete example. So okay, so like let's just use policing because it's in my head, even though, you know, there are lots of different ways this stuff manifests other than our criminal justice system. But someone might say, for example, well, they're in jail because they committed a crime. And if they just didn't commit that crime, then they wouldn't be in jail, right? So if a higher proportion of Black people are in jail, that means they're committing more crimes. And if they just didn't do that, they wouldn't have a problem. The problem is that it's not only people who, not all people who commit crimes go to jail, right? And so one layer of that is that if you are more likely to be surveilled by police, if police are more likely to see you as a criminal, regardless of whether you're a criminal or not, they're more likely, for example, to pull Black people over, right? Even though the data is out there that it is white people who are more likely to be carrying drugs in their car, right? So it's not, we want to simplify it and say it's just about don't commit the crime, but there are lots of people who are committing the crime who are white, who are not getting caught because police aren't paying attention to it, because they're not seen as criminals, because they're seen as more easier to rehabilitate, for example. And so it's not just a matter of who does what, but of how society treats that and the differences that are created in that. Okay, so that's one part of it. So it's not just a matter of choice, but how those choices play out in society. The other part of that.
So sorry, Michaela. So you could say, if somebody said, well, look at, you know, the population of the jails, you could say that, well, not everyone who commits the crime is in jail, as when you're just talking to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We know that crime rates and arrest rates are very different. So I used to do some lecturing in criminology, and that was one thing that was important for people to understand, is that we often, when we look at incarceration rates, we think that's crime rates, and that's not the same thing. The other thing that I would say is that people's choices, and maybe who their friends are, who they hang out with, what's going on in their communities, might be limited. So people can make choices, but those choices can be constrained by where you live, who your parents are, how you grow up, the money that you have, the resources that you have. So for example, there are a lot of Black and Latino men who go to jail for drug crimes, that if they had had the resources to go to rehab, may not have happened, right? So there's lots of differences there.
So the gentleman who posted the question just added this kind of as a continuation. So how would you respond to somebody who said that looking at education levels and neighborhoods where people live, the careers that people have, you know, are all based on, you know, that those things are not based on race and are based on choices that people make? I mean, it's just applying it in addition to incarceration to just all these different things.
They're doubling down on the choices, right?
Yeah.
They're saying, well, those things are choices as well. I mean, go back and like talk about, you know, at what point is it a pure choice, right? When our lives are affected by everything that has come before us, right? So for example, there is a history in our country of segregation, but not just segregation, but housing inequality. And, you know, some people will say, well, you know, people can choose where they live. But if they don't have the resources to live in a certain place, or if they are steered away from certain areas because of the color of their skin, then that can make a difference. I would try to challenge how we're understanding choice, and that people are being very ahistorical about what choices are, right? We end up in the setting that we're in. And part of that is the story that we tell about rich white people and how they do better, right? People tend to think that rich white people have better morals. Like, that is a bias that people have, that somehow because they have more money, they were better and did better. But the stories that we hear about rich white people often leave out the privileges that helped make that happen. So for example, Bill Gates. The story we often hear about Bill Gates is he's a college dropout who started his own business out of his garage, and look where he is now. Great, wonderful. Not untrue. He dropped out of a very prominent college, I think in his third year. But before that, he went to boarding schools where he had access to some of the first computers. He came from a very rich family. So when he was starting his own business out of a garage, his mom, for example, would fly him home for Sunday dinners. and hire a housekeeper for him. So things are definitely more possible when you have those resources, when you've been exposed to computers and technology in a way that other people have not. That's not to say that Bill Gates isn't smart and capable and a hard worker, but he had these other things that helped him along the way. And we tend to push those away and focus on the bootstraps that you pull yourself up with. And we don't think about the resources that are available to people.
And I think too, part of that is, you're coming into a difficult conversation. You're talking to somebody who really thinks differently than you do. And the library's done a lot of work with difficult conversations. And you're not going to convince a person by what, you're not by what you respond to them. But what you can do is listen to them, ask questions. I mean, really listen to what they say,
Yes.
ask questions, and then share what you think. And that's a way to kind of open people up to what you have to say.
Yeah, and a powerful question is, why do you think that? What information do you have that maybe I don't have, right? And try to genuinely engage with people. Although sometimes, if people really aren't in for a productive conversation, you also maybe don't need to engage with them. Maybe you can put your energies toward more productive conversations, but you have to assess that in the moment.
Right. Well, I don't see any more questions. Michaela, I want to thank you so much for all of your work with the anti-racism series. Check out the full series at writelibrary.org/anti-racism 101. I'll actually send out an email probably tomorrow with information about how to access that.
Okay.
And thank you again, and everyone have a good night. Thanks for coming.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Michaela.
Have a good night.
You too. Hey, Michaela, the papers that I need.
Yes, tonight,
process.
right now.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.